In honor of this year's theme, We Got Us, we're holding a series of virtual convenings that will deepen our collective knowledge and sharpen our resistance tactics and also cultivate connection and joy. And today, we're going to be exploring the power and necessity of dissent and community access to family policing courts in the broader struggle to resist and abolish family policing and to build strong community defense ecosystems. So before we get started, I want to touch on accessibility. There's closed captioning that's available. You can access that by clicking the three dots under More and then select closed captioning. I also want to let folks know that we are going to be recording. And we're going to make the recording available on the Black Mothers March website and also on MFP's resource library. So if you don't feel comfortable having your face shown or your name show up, please do turn off your camera and change your name to something that you feel more comfortable with being visible. And then the last piece, we're going to have a Q&A at the very end. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We will collect them and circle back to them towards the end. Now, last but not least, I want to introduce to y'all our incredible speakers that we have today. We're going to be in conversation with. First, we have April Lee, she, her. April is a community activist and co-founder of Philly Voice for Change. Philly Voice for Change is a nonprofit built by and for impacted families and is dedicated to ending family separation caused by poverty, substance use, and state intervention. Next, we have Elizabeth Rossi, aka Beth. She, her, is a director of strategic initiatives at Civil Rights Corps, where she litigates challenges to family separation in criminal and family policing systems. She's currently challenging policies in Durham, North Carolina, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, that exclude the press and public from dependency proceedings in violation of the First Amendment. Elizabeth lives in Baltimore and is the mom to Shiloh and Ozzy. We have Hani Mirza, he, him. He's the director and senior attorney of Power and Democracy program at Advancement Project. Through movement lawyering, the Power and Democracy program helps racial justice movements use democratic tools to make long-lasting change with the goal of building a multiracial and classless democracy. And then we have Jamie Marsicano, they, them. Jamie is an organizer and lawyer dedicated to combating state repression in the South. Jamie's organizing centers around working with criminal and parent defendants and their communities, both in and out of the courtroom, to impact the outcome of their cases. Jamie believes in the power of aggressive, political, and participatory defense to attack family policing and the prison industrial complex as systems over time, while mitigating the harm done to individuals fighting for their families and their freedom now. So, this is a dope ass group, y'all. And I'm excited to get into it. So let's get started. Um, Over the last year, I think we have all seen collectively and experienced the expansion of authoritarianism in the United States. There have been daily assaults on our communities, our bodies, our psyches, our critical but hugely meager public benefit systems, and our spirits. Authoritarianism thrives on criminalization and isolation, and we've seen these tactics at work. And yet we know it's not new. We know that our communities and our bodies and our spirits and our support systems have always been in the crosshairs of racial capitalism. And that these systems are designed to oppress us. And they were the prototypes to what we're seeing now. And we know that these tactics and these tools have long been used in the family policing systems to isolate and fray communities through confidentiality laws, gag orders, orders of protection, and more. The family policing system tries to silence families, to keep systems and its operations behind a veil of secrecy while simultaneously exposing families in their most intimate details to the public, and then criminalizing community presence through closed courtrooms and no contact orders. So, Hani, I want to turn to you and ask you to ground us in the importance of protest and dissent in this moment and the current threats. And I also want to sort of expand it out beyond the family policing system because we know these carceral systems are linked. So if you can share with us some dissent that you've seen recently and the impact it has, I think that would be a great place for us to start.
Yeah, definitely. And can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, my hotel internet gave out, so I'm on my phone, and happy to be here. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak. Obviously, we hear on the news every day the issues that are rising around dissent, around authoritarianism, repression, especially under this administration. But everybody here and a lot of other communities know that this is not something new. It's existed before the Trump administration, and the fight for dissent and community action and collective action has existed throughout this country's history. I wanted to, and because we these like issues of dissent, these examples of dissent are so well known. I just wanted to highlight them to kind of start out the conversation. And the two specific ones I want to talk about are the dissent within the Palestine movement as an example of dissent that has been shut down, repressed, even before the Trump administration. But then we saw different tactics being used within the after the Trump got into power. And so before the Trump administration, there were universities attacking students. A lot of the recent Palestine movement has has kind of branched out within the United States, has come out of student protest and student collective action. And in response to that, we saw even during the Biden years, as folks know, a repression by universities against students supporting supporting Palestinian lives. And so we've seen, holding transcripts, expulsions, suspensions, and in response, we've seen student movements grow even bigger to push back against the targeting that students were facing in this in that movement. And when Trump came into power, there was a concerted effort to ramp up that suppression and repression of dissent, which was focused within the Palestine movement, was focused on changing their narrative, getting folks focused on what was happening in Gaza, the genocide and the repression and the settler colonialism that exists. That was a very real thing that the students were fighting for. And in response, when Trump came into power, we saw the federal government getting more involved in pushing back against student movements. For example, forcing universities like Columbia University to ramp up targeting on against students in the pro-Palestine movement, forcing Columbia University to taking over, like, for example, whole programs, having like conservatorships, all these like attempts to wipe out dissent. And in response, what we've seen is that the and one of the reasons why dissent is so critical and so important is that for the most part, all of these actions that the Trump administration has taken, universities have taken, state governments have taken, have largely failed in shifting the narrative away from what the pro-Palestine movement has been pushing for, that the genocide in Gaza is happening, that uh, there's settler colonialism in the region, in Israel, in Palestine, and uh, and it continues to this day. And so I think like that is the power of dissent. Like, we've seen the largest, most powerful government in the history of the world, and who MLK called the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, fail in their efforts to, stop this movement, which is a global movement. But even within their own territory, within the U.S., they're unable to push back, and we've seen examples of that. Uh, um, Even in the courtroom, for example, we've seen people who are detained for speaking about Palestine be freed, like Mahmoud Khalil. Uh, um, uh, we've seen the Palestine student movement, for example, in Colombia, be able to move forward with their case against Colombia's repression against them recently in an order that came out a couple of weeks ago. So we're seeing wins even translate into very conservative, reactionary forums for like courtrooms. And so I think that that's a powerful example. Another example, obviously, is ICE, the attack on immigrants by ICE, the federal government, and the right wing. And we've seen how collective action has been so powerful, sometimes even more powerful than arguments in court. Actually, I would say usually more powerful than arguments in court, to push back and try to bring people back home and get them out of detention. An example I've already mentioned is obviously Mahmoud Khalil, but also a great example is Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was targeted by the Trump administration, but his union and other groups, like, nonprofit groups, his union and his community fought back against that detention for months and months, and no matter what was happening in court, that steady dissent, push for against and community support against the Trump administration was powerful enough to release him. And I think that's another great example. And I think there are local examples even from before the Trump era that show that community action, dissent, and speaking out are sometimes more powerful than any institutionalized way of trying to make change, like through legislation and through the court system. And really, it's the court system and the legislative bodies that are, behind. They're trying to catch up to what folks are saying on the street. And really, the most powerful thing is to have a community and not just a single person fighting for that change.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that so much resonates. And I think that one of the things that I want to uplift that I think is going to come out through our discussion, is the fact that the dissent, these examples that you've given and that we're going to learn, we see in family policing, is that as the government clamps down, people get bigger, they get more collective, they go harder. And can you just just in a couple of minutes talk about how you've seen that type of resistance outside of dominant institutions? And when I say dominant institutions, I mean like outside of the legislature, outside of, trying to do like a big sort of like class action. We think about like
Mhm.
Brown v. Board of Education, Roe, whatever, da da da. Can you talk about how that has really shifted the public consciousness on how we understand imperialism, settler colonialism, racism, and how the interconnections?
Yeah, it definitely. And I think it's what I've noticed and I can give the example of the student movement in at Columbia University on the issue of Palestine. There was like a collective effort to get information out to citizen journalists and like, other groups, and like investigative journalists to get it out there what like kind of repression and what kind of discrimination that these students were facing. There was collective action against like protecting people who were being targeted. There was collective action against, there were sit-ins. There were, in parts of like to stop the kind of movement, to push the movement and continue it. And it got national attention, it got international attention, and it was able to kind of change the discourse. But even at a local level, like within the student body, you saw a shift in how how folks were protecting each other, and no single person was kind of the face of the movement, and so they couldn't be the target, only. And so that made it hard for these bigger institutions to take action. And I think like what we've seen is, even in and I'll give a personal example on a case I worked on about how like going through the formal systems sometimes doesn't is not as effective, and sometimes usually isn't as effective as like spreading the word and getting the issue out there for folks to see what's actually happening. In my prior job, I was working on this debtor's prison issue that was happening in White Settlement, Texas, which is the small town 45 minutes out of Fort Worth, where they were effectively running a debtor's prison. If you aren't able to pay the tickets you get in municipal court, they were even cuffing people in the courtroom. It was terrible. But a, a group of folks got together, like some nonprofits, and they started doing court watching, and we saw like an immediate shift in how the judge was looking at cases as opposed to what we were hearing before we announced that we were part of an organization or a group. And then the word, the media started picking it up, and it became a local issue and a regional issue. Meanwhile, we tried to file like a judicial complaint, and that kind of got lost, and that was like sending something into a black hole. But the
Mm.
media pressure, the community pressure was enough for them to get rid of that judge who really was the main instigator in creating this debtor's prison, and that in large part ended a lot of those issues. So that's just an example of like a local issue that might not get like national or international attention, but is equally as powerful, and a great example of local community presence and dissent and free speech changing the course of what was happening, and stopping the harm where the judicial complaint process completely failed. I don't even know what happened with that complaint. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that wouldn't be the first time
Yeah.
we've had that experience with so-called court processes. So
Yeah.
thank you. I want to take us and shift a little bit to focus on this dissent and the importance of community presence and collective action as it relates to the family policing system and what we're seeing. And I think, you know, April, like we've talked so many times about how isolation and criminalization is core to the family policing system and the way that it makes people feel as though they are alone, right? And turns community members and those people who are your essentially your help, your lifelines, tries to disconnect those folks from you. And so I would love if you could talk a little bit about how you've seen some of these authoritarian tactics like isolation, gag orders, confidentiality laws, court exclusions, things like how you've seen the family policing system use these strategies and then the stories it tells about communities, Black folks, their families, their children to justify it.
I mean, one, thanks for having me. Like, really in an insidious way, right? It's not the same as if you're like going to criminal court and like these other courts where it's like open, like the public kind of understands and knows what goes on in criminal court, right? Like most people can um like run down some of their rights when it comes down to police, right? Almost no one, and I wouldn't say no one, but the majority of folks, when it comes down to understanding your rights as a parent, like going through the family policing system is like unheard of, right? Especially in Philadelphia, right? Some states are like further along. And part of that is because of that like insidious piece of, right, when the mass public think about children being removed from their parents, you automatically think, oh my God, it must be abuse. Something is wrong with this individual person, right? Like, and then you like couple that with the stigma. And I'm going to talk about within our community, right? Like when you're like raised in a community and you have a culture of like cover your own faults, right? Don't let these people know what the hell going on outside the house, like all of these different things. So when you get like swooped into the family policing system, it's easy to automatically be isolated, right? Like I don't want these people to know, right, what's going on. And I can say that for myself. I thought I was the only one. Right? Like I was the only one that was being fucked over until you realize, like, no, there are a lot of people being fucked over by the system, right? There are a lot of stories just like mine, right? Like you're not a unicorn, you're not a monolith, right? And that's what kind of helps break down some of that. But in order to do that, right? Like they have spent years upon years of convincing us, right, that we were the problem, we are the problem, we cannot parent correctly, right? We cannot provide for our children and like all these different layers that like people internalize, right? And I was like Me and you was talking like I was against, right, on the fence. Let me not say against, but I was on the fence when it comes down to open courts, right? And then I'm like, hold on, because once again, sometimes you can only go off of your experience and education matters, right? And going off of my experience, I've seen people tokenize our people so many different ways, right?
Yeah,
So I was kind of just like looking at it through that lens,
yeah,
right? Until I realized like that is the part, right? That goes into wanting to us quiet, right? That goes into their shame. That goes into all of those things that they like built within our bodies that makes it hard for us to fight back, right? Like when you're holding someone's child or children and you feel like they you holding them hostage, right? You would damn near say okay to anything,
yeah.
right? And that's a very real thing, right? So getting on the other side of that of what's like actually needed to like build community in that way and to recognize the insidiousness of the family policing system, right? And to educate the community, myself included, right? Like I said, we also have to educate ourselves on different things, right? On actually what's going on so that outside game can actually like you're changing individual lives, just not the massive thing. Because you know, cases get won outside of court,
Yeah.
right? Like when you understand that and you're educated enough and educating your community in a way, right, that through that political education and know your rights and the things that you're trying to build within your community, then you can stop it long before it gets to that point, even if, right? Because in Philly, it's still like 100% closed when it comes down to dependency court, even family court, right? Like, so thinking about those ways of what we do on the outside that can benefit that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I really wanted to spend a little bit more time and invite Jamie you into the conversation too on that piece about you said cases can be and so often are won outside of court. And so I want to invite both of y'all to talk about in Philadelphia and also in Durham in North Carolina what it looks like and how you've seen community presence in the courts and also before things even get to courts shift power, right? And really be able to impact not only, and it's importantly, like individual families, but also systemic power. So maybe I pass it to y'all to speak on that.
Jamie, you want to take it?
Sure,
And
I'll
I
step
go
in, give you a
behind you.
break. Yeah, so like as April, as you've been talking about, it is easier to separate a family when the family is alone. And that is what the court system is trying to do. And so what a lot of the amazing organizing in North Carolina that we've seen has done has been directly combat these efforts to isolate parents by surrounding parents and families with support. And I think that, we really can think about how community organizing can impact the legal. We kind of think that we're kind of made to think that legal, it's only for the lawyers. The lawyers need to handle it. We're not equipped as community members. We don't have the knowledge, we don't have the skills, we don't have the power to impact the law and the legal cases that parents and families are facing. But kind of what April's like pointing to, sometimes the community is really what can beat the case and can actually pull in more tactics and more skills and use more skills than even the lawyers can, who are kind of confined to the corners of the paper and the law and the arguments that they can make in court. Um, so like some ways we've seen that happen is how community organizing has completely changed the landscape for cases is mutual aid, right? So if people are being criminalized or their kids are being taken because they don't have enough resources, we've seen folks who are organizing in North Carolina and in Durham, which is where I live, to get the bassinet, to help get the furniture, to give the parent money so that they can like raise money and give it to the parents so that they can provide for their children, to provide transportation to court so that we know when parents are able to show up at court, they're given a little bit more, they're taken a little bit more seriously. They're seen as caring more about the case, even though we know that like access to your own court date is a huge barrier for so many parents. And then also for folks to not be able to go alone, to be emotionally supported through those court cases, they can show up, they can feel like they're held. It's easier to remain calmer when every emotion you show is being policed in that courtroom. But also, like, even beyond sort of these material supports and these like mutual aid, we have really seen in North Carolina how community organizing can actually like really impact the legal, um, where there is sort of insufficient lawyers who aren't really advocating. We've seen organizers and other impacted parents supporting parents by prepping them for testimony, pretending to be the DSS lawyer, and going through questions, things that the lawyer should be doing with the parents. But so often when there's not adequate representation, the parents don't get that kind of prep. We've also seen that when lawyers are being watched by the community, they fight a little harder, right? I mean, when they're actually in front of someone, there's someone to hold them accountable. We see them making harder arguments, filing more motions. Same with the judges. When the judges can see that a parent, a family is supported, they they show the family oftentimes a little bit more grace, which is something that isn't fair, but having the community support these parents has really made an impact in that way. I think that there's one example that really sort of illustrates how much the community can impact the legal outcome of a case. We've seen recently in our rural county in North Carolina, outside of Durham, there was a mother who had several children who were in the system, all in different placements, right? So there were some people with kinship placements, some people in with strangers in foster care, and her youngest child, actually died while in DSS custody. And this is a like tragedy and a crisis that the DSS in that county really tried to sweep under the rug and really would have been able to had the community not made it so loud and brought attention. And in doing so, in making it so that DSS couldn't put this story under the rug, they brought in an amazing organization, Carolina Parent Defenders, that could actually provide better advocacy from the legal side than the court-appointed attorney. And it actually pushed the county and the state to investigate the death. And it came out that there was foul play and that DSS foster care was not a safer place for this baby. And that has completely shifted the course of this mother's case to fight and get the rest of her children back. And we're hopeful that she will be able to get her kids back to be reunited. And so those are just some examples of how much communities, regardless of the lawyers, or even when we're lucky in tandem with the lawyers, can change these outcomes of these cases.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
And one of the things I do like want to point out that I didn't hit on like that insidious piece, right? And Jamie, you was talking like briefly about it, right? Like the attorneys, like family itself is put in an adversarial position, right? Like you separate the child from the parent, the child get attorney, the parent gets an attorney. Then like say if that family like that child may be in kinship, right? Like now you don't want grandma to associate with her own daughter because the child is in the house, or it's like intentional to kind of break up and keep the family in the adversarial position, right? Without you understanding the ins and outs, right? So part of that, that community piece, not only for the judges and the attorneys, but also case managers, right? Like I dig in people ass, and you'd be surprised how much they would straighten up when they know as well that they're being watched, right? Like, and they know that the community knows its policies, like, right? Like, actually, that's not part of the protocol. You cannot do that, right? So I do want to lift that up and the importance of that and understanding that, like, sometimes you're not going to be able to change attorneys' minds all the time, right? Like, like recently, like whole community show up, right? And an attorney is an asshole. And it's like, all right, there's nothing that you can do as far as like, all right, we can't mobilize surrounding this attorney, but what we can do is mobilize surrounding this family. All right, now what do you need to advocate for yourself? How do you, right? You can go to court and file yourself, right? Like, it's certain motions that you can file as an individual person if your attorney is not doing it. Let's teach you how to do that. Let's go up to the courthouse on the 11th floor and file this. Like, if you want that letter to the judge to actually be written or read or enter into evidence, then you must file it. You cannot just send a judge a random letter, right? Because there is not going to be enter into evidence, right? So part of that education piece and like pushing back throughout those pieces is just 100% needed, because I don't want people to think that like you always gonna have an opening um to the court process, to the attorneys, to the judges or whatever like that. But what we can do is make that shit, right? Like create those openings and create things and prepare people in such a way, right? Like we've had situations where the whole community showed up, plenty of people showed up. Let's go fix this woman's house,
Yeah.
right? And before it even gets there, right? Like, how do you collect this evidence, right? Like they saying dad don't have nobody, let's show up in bulk, and everybody gets sequestered, right? I keep getting kicked out of court a lot recently, right? Like, but once you in there, put your name on record, and then they can go ahead and kick you out. They can't say that this person didn't have people show up for them, that they don't have a connection to the community, that they don't have a village surrounding them, right? Especially when you're dealing with courts like ours. And it's sad to say, um, Jamie, you're in North Carolina and I'm in Philadelphia, and you part of the South and I'm not, and it's just as fucked up in both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? The same things are going on. So understand like the intentionality and what we need to do in order to dissent and fight back.
That's right. That's right. And I, the, I think another thing that I'm hearing is like, it's not only like being able to show up for each other in community, and that in and of itself is radicalizing. And that in and of itself does part of the political education that you're talking about, April, that frankly, all of us need to do because we've all been, disciplined to believe that this system is a certain way. But also like to the mutual aid part and to the showing up and providing and supporting family with what they need. It is exactly what the system doesn't do. And it reveals that fundamental lie when the system says it's about protection. It's like, you're not about protection. Community showed up. Community gave the bassinet. Community made sure this person got to court. Community cleaned this mama's house, right? And so, like, really seeing how it is multifaceted, the way that community presence inside courts and outside of the courts can really shift power. So I want to shift a little bit. And Beth, I want to talk to you about the work that CRC is doing to challenge some of these closed court closures in the South and the North, all over, and to talk about, just to talk a little bit about that work, and why it's important, and how it's been connected to sort of the broader movement to resist and abolish family policing and ensure community can be present in the courtroom.
Thanks, Miriam. Thanks, everybody. It's really great to be here, and also really wonderful to be on this panel with April and Jamie, whom I've been working with in North Carolina and Philly over the last few years. And so thanks a lot for letting me speak. Court access, I think, as a lot of you all have highlighted, is really about narrative. It's about breaking the system's chokehold on the story that's told about what happens in these courtrooms and what happens in these cases. It's about de-isolation and destigmatization. It's about communities building power, and it's about truth and accountability. And that is what attracted civil rights court to North Carolina and to Philadelphia. These are places where community is organizing and has a goal of using court access to build power within communities in all of the different ways that Jamie and Hani and April have talked about. And so CRC has worked historically mainly in the criminal system. And throughout my career, whenever I've tried to investigate things that seem fucked up in the court system, I just go and I court watch. I sit in the back of the courtrooms for hours and hours and days, and I take lots of notes and I talk to lots of people. And when I started hearing about the fucked up shit that was happening all around, including talking to Amanda a lot about what was happening in Durham, my team and I went down, and just like everyone else in that community, got kicked out of court multiple times. And we saw how the system was retaliating against people who were trying to hold it accountable, who were trying to reveal what was actually happening, who were trying to show up and support each other, who were trying to push back on the horrific violations and violence, frankly, that's happening inside of these courtrooms, these courthouses every single day. And so CRC filed a lawsuit against a judge in Durham County, Judge Walker, and the sheriff, asking the court to recognize a First Amendment qualified public right of access to court proceedings, to the hearings themselves, independent state court. There's no court that's ever held that such a right exists, and there are a lot of courts that have held that it doesn't exist. So it's a really fun, sort of novel legal issue to tackle. But again, more importantly, it's really about how this litigation allows us to lift up the question that so many of you on this call have been asking, which is like, what is the system hiding? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what's actually going on behind this veil of secrecy. Let's lift the curtain and let's get the facts out there so that we can talk about how to actually keep families and communities safe. So that is the lawsuit in North Carolina. We're also doing work in Philadelphia on behalf of a journalist who's interested in covering systemic problems in the Philadelphia system and who's been barred from court. And fun fact there, the proceedings related to the journalist's petitions for access are themselves sealed. So I can't really share very much about what is going on in the briefs or the hearings because the judge has said that the hearings, to open the hearings, are closed. So we are now like firmly in Alice in Wonderland land, which I know you all are super familiar with. So that's kind of the brief overview of what's happening. And I just want to reiterate, these lawsuits and other litigation that we're thinking about and working on are not an end in themselves. Like court access is not going to solve the problem. I think in our view, or our sort of theory of change, is that greater access to these proceedings is a tool. And once that tool is on the table, community can figure out how to use it. Or it's already something that, for example, folks in Philadelphia and North Carolina have been asking for, have been wanting to have that tool in their toolbox. And so I think, like any tool, it could be used for good and it could be used in ways that our communities wouldn't necessarily like. And so, the process of opening up these courts and challenging what's going on, in them, and what's going on in terms of how they're being kept so secret, is a tool, again, that I think community can really wield to its advantage.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. And I think, the question, like, what are these courts hiding is so, so, so important because I think one of the things that's striking to me about family policing, it's like they're not about secrecy across the board. They're definitely down to blow up families' lives. They're definitely down to talk to any person to get their information to do their quote unquote investigation. But when it comes to them, that's when it's about protecting the child for confidentiality, only under those circumstances. And I think all of us in this room see right through that. We're going to move into our sort of like last part of the discussion and then leave some time for Q&A. And Jamie, I want to come back to you because I know that you have, in addition to the advocacy that you've done and the activism and collective action that you've done around family policing in Durham, you have also been deeply involved and connected to broader and connected and sister resistance movements, whether it's prison abolition, immigrant justice. So if you could talk to us a little bit again about how you've seen community presence be successful, and successful in the sense of both shifting power and also building power in community among the collective. So yeah, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, two big cases come to mind. One is in Atlanta, Georgia, the Stop Cop City case. Another one is in Texas, the Prairie Land cases. And so both of these cases are cases that were in regards to activism, criminalizing activism in Georgia to stop the building of a huge fake cop city for them to practice that was going to take over like 200 square miles, and then in Prairie Land in Texas, a case about where activists have been in jail for like 10 months now for doing a protest outside in an ICE facility. And so the questions I really want us to think about is like how activism can be criminalized, and we are seeing that as well. How repression is coming in the family policing movement to folks who are trying to speak out against it. So I brought some pictures to show how did in Atlanta and in Texas, how did folks sort of respond? What do we do when the supporters are getting criminalized? And so these pictures that I kind of put together for this first slide, they have to do with the Stop Cop City movement. So it got really scary in this movement because as the activists started getting rounded up for trying to stop the construction of this huge facility, they started arresting the supporters. So a bail fund that was bailing them out got got charged with RICO violations. And so it became really scary to support these folks. But they also knew, just like we know with parents, we really need to that we can't leave them alone. And so what they did was they kind of like, if you look at this top one in the middle, they kind of like memeified it. They made it kind of like accessible to participate. And what they did is they got louder, and they basically made their presence more unavailable, or more available, more louder, more visible. That's the word I'm looking for. And so what they did was they would step outside in this one on the left. They would sit outside the court house for these cases, and they would give out literature about the issue that this case was about. And so this idea that you think we're criminals, but what we're doing is very First Amendment. We're handing out pieces of paper, we're educating the population. And what you can't see in this photo is they also brought food. So they would feed the people who were going to court, including the defendants, and they would also just feed anyone who came. So it kind of like became very hard to arrest supporters of this movement because they were feeding people and passing out booklets, right? And then in these two pictures, the one on the far right and the one in the bottom, they really got creative. On the right, it's kind of blurry because it's like a screen grab from a video, but they had a Vogue dance party outside of the courthouse. They had a press conference and it turned into a dance party. They were dancing to Beyonce, You Won't Break My Soul, right? And so again, it's like you think that these people are scary, they're going to try and attack the court system, but actually they're just voguing, right? And then this one in the bottom, one day they actually brought a band. It was like a punk band. So you see the singer sort of in the front with the mic, and then behind them is this band and these musicians. Again, making it really hard to make this movement seem violent. And then what you don't see is like there was a bunch of people dancing, like doing like this. So that was a little bit in Atlanta, a lot of like creativity and music there. If we go to the next slide, in Texas, um, this one was also like really scary. They first arrested these people who all they had done was like a noise demonstration. They had made noise outside of a ICE detention center to show the immigrants trapped inside, like, we see you, we love you, we're not going to forget about you. And they got arrested and charged with terrorism and attempted murder of the immigration detention center officers. So it was incredibly scary. And then when one young mother who was arrested called her husband on the phone, for example, to ask him to clean her house, helps just take care of the kids while she's inside. They then came and arrested the husband. So it was another case and raided their house. So it was another case where the supporters were becoming criminalized, and people very much were very scared to participate in this movement. So what did the family members and the supporters do? They again sort of disarmed this criminalization by making it kind of fun, kind of like artsy. They used a lot of visual art. So on this left, you see a puppet of the judge. And this was probably like a 10-foot tall puppet. And someone would like get in it and operate it from under the robe. And it actually reminded me of the family policing situation in the courtrooms because in criminal, they're not supposed to be able to to close the courts like they so often do in family policing. But this judge actually, he made it so that only the court could only hold about 10, 15 people, and including like the news, and then put a streaming, you could watch it in a city 30 miles away from the courthouse. And so it really reminded me of the family policing courts because he was effectively making it impossible to know what was going on. So what they did was they made a big puppet of the judge. The group decided who are going to be our 2 or 3 people who go in and take notes and try and figure out what's happening. Those people would come outside the courthouse, explain what happened in the court date, and then the judge would get on Instagram, the judge puppet, and sort of give a recap of what happened. So they brought what happened in the courtroom out to the people. It was hilarious. And what that really did was it got more people to come involved. So in this one in the middle where you see like preachers, those white preachers were not interested in the case that of these brown and trans defendants until this puppet started really telling the world about what happened in what is happening and how these folks were being railroaded. They said this is something that is both like accessible for me to participate in and something I care about. And these preachers came and taught, and they did their own press conference. And so this puppet made it a lot easier for a lot of folks to participate. The one above it, you see they had like a jury pool slot machine. They were basically saying like the judge was clearly trying to rig the jury. So they were using art to sort of tell the story of what was happening in the case. Um, and then, yeah, on the right, you see that they talking about this is a show trial. So it's just showing like how they use visual art to really tell the story, even when the court was being closed. And so I think like the lessons that we can learn from both of these movements that I do think we can take to the family policing movement and cases there as well is that like when they want to isolate us, I think that and isolate our parents and isolate our communities, I think that the tendency is to feel like, okay, we need to hide in the shadows, we need to listen, we need to like comply, but actually that makes it easier to isolate and easier to separate, right? And so what these folks did was actually lean in faster and louder and more publicly and unafraid and make it sort of show how this is actually not a criminal thing to do. We're just offering support. So I think that those are some examples that can apply to our family policing movement too.
Thank you, thank you. And those are like incredible. And I think, with family policing, it's like this takes me back to what you were saying, April, with it's like you trying to say this man out here has no one. Well, maybe you'll kick us out, but you're still about to get 50 people who are going to put their name on the record and don't say he doesn't have anyone. So I think it's the same, we see the same concept and we see why the family policing system and other systems are so hell bent on pushing that out and making sure that people can't access. And so we're moving into the question and answer period. So definitely want folks to drop their questions in the chat. We are collecting them. We want to be able to interact with y'all. And while you're doing that, I want to put another question out there. And April, I want to toss this one to you, but also invite others, everyone else to sort of jump in on this. I think there is like two things that I want to lift up. One, I think that when there can be this idea that dissent and protest is not strategic. It's just people popping up doing some shit, right? When really, actually, community presence, dissent, protest is deeply strategic. And one thing that you talked about in our group and brought more broadly, April, is part of the strategy being really clear about who your people are, who your co-conspirators are, and who your allies are, and who isn't. And I want to just and also sort of talking about moving from individual activism to collective activism, because not all of us got our people right now, but we can move towards it. So I want to ask you to just talk about that a little bit and also invite others to jump in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely was hard-won lessons before I met all you guys. Before I actually found my people, right? And like, and throughout that process, like, one, it matters, right? It is a huge difference between an ally and a co-conspirator,
Yeah.
right? Recognize that difference. Like those allies might be in these work groups with you, these never-ending work groups that bring up recommendations that go nowhere, that sit on the shelf. And we just worked on this issue for the last 4 years and absolutely nothing came out of it, right? Those can be allies, right? Then you have co-conspirators that's going to kind of put some skin in the game,
Mm,
right? Utilize
mm,
their privilege, their position. You have attorneys that will utilize their knowledge to really co-create with the community, right? Like real community lawyering and allowing the community to figure it out and kind of
mm,
be our translator, right? Like, and it once again, it was a whole lot of hard-won lessons for me because I've been a part of them all,
mm,
right? I've been a part of every task force, coalition, work group, like, and all of these different things, right? And if that's where you're at, one, I want to say that's okay, right? You're right where you're supposed to be at, and trying to figure that piece out. And one of the things that I've learned, right, is to also know when to keep shit close to your chest,
mm,
right? And that's something, forgive my hood terminology, like my dialect switches up depending on, right? Like, right, like, don't let everyone know what you're doing. Don't let everyone know what you're about to do. Don't
mhm,
let everyone know like your tactics, or like this is what's about to go down,
mhm,
right? Because you also, outside of those allies and co-conspirators, you also have those people that will bite your fucking back out, right? And
okay,
destroy your movement before it even gets started,
okay. Yeah.
right? So, and like really taking the time to think about those things, right? Like we don't have a really huge movement here in Philadelphia. We're actively building it, right? Like I was that lone person like on an island by myself until you like connected and you grow, you educate yourself and like all of those different things, right? Like so if you like don't cause harm by not educating yourself and not figuring out how to
Mm,
connect to the right folk. Because you can have like most of the policies, laws, all this shit has unintended consequences that we end up suffering the impact of,
mm, mm,
right? And even certain organizing, right? You may want to organize around a certain issue and you want this bill that's going to fuck us over completely,
yep.
right? But you didn't educate yourself, or because of who you're listening to, right? Because you have that when it comes down to, right? We've always, um, well, so history has shown, right, that you will have infiltrators within movements, right? That's going to possibly like try to deter, right? Our civil rights movements went into women's movements, right? Right? Like certain things would be like broke apart versus actually paying attention to your focus, right? Pay attention to where you're going, right? And be okay with cutting people to fuck off and be okay with, yo, Miriam, right? I don't know. I want to sit down and have coffee, right? Like be okay to kind of have those type of conversations with folks that's doing the work to pull them in.
Yeah.
Cause yeah, don't get suckered by the bullshit because it's crazy. They will.
Yes, yes, thank you. And I see as a follow-up, and y'all, we have some information about registering for Black Mothers March. If you haven't, y'all need to. I'm gonna put it in the chat because I want to keep this discussion going, and put in the chat about our upcoming follow-up virtual events for Black Mothers March. So look in the chat, take the information, click the links, log, do all the things. I want to go back to Jen, put a question. We Jen says we talked about putting names on the record when getting kicked out of courtrooms, and wanting to know if y'all can say a little bit more about that. And I might even expand the question to say, like, when there are closed courtrooms, what are other things that you can do to make your presence known, right? So it's getting your name on the record, but there's other stuff. Can y'all talk about that?
I just took up a bunch of time. Beth, Jamie,
I mean, I'll just ask,
Go for Yeah,
say
go for it.
generally, like protesting outside the courtroom, like doing actions outside the courtroom. I mean, the system knows you're there, Yeah, go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Hani. And I think that another thing that we've done in Durham is, it doesn't actually even have to be on that day, right? If no one can get into the court, but maybe the parent is gagged, can't talk about it. But what the parent can do is kind of like talk with one-on-one with their community, and then the community can amplify that story outside of it at a public teach-in, build up some popular education, or do all kinds of things in that way. So we can extend sort of the time of advocacy well beyond actually like the time in court and the courtroom.
It's also something that you can ask your counsel to put on the record. I'd like to note that there are 20 people in the hall who came here to support my client. And also, if it's possible in your jurisdiction, part of the participatory defense can be submitting declarations, for example, and just, it does take some advocacy, it does take sort of some pressuring of your lawyer, but those are some options too.
And I would also say, and obviously, like all of this is like you're judging your own, you got to do your risk analysis and who you have around you. But like a lot of us know, there are raggedy lawyers out here who aren't going to stand up and say, my client has 20 people outside. So then I think part of the question is, do you feel comfortable? Can you stand up and say, like, Your Honor, I have people outside here for me that are trying to get in? I think that even having community presence in the court halls, if you can't get into the courtroom, and talking to the sheriffs and the court officers to say, "Oh, that looks like a mighty big courtroom. We can't fit in there." I was in one down the hall and it looks really big, like even just there's other ways to make the presence felt, even if you can't get into the courtroom and even if you can't, get on that court record. And also, I think so much of it is about making your presence known, not just to the institutions, but to your homies who are being dragged through the system. So with that, maybe I can ask, we have dropped in the chat information for the upcoming events, our community power party. Please join y'all. We're going to be just creating some joy and love and fun on the interwebs. And then we're going to have We Got Us, which really continues this conversation and goes in deep about what are some of the other tactics we can use to really build up community defense. Thank you so much to all of y'all, April, Honey, Jamie, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for being here. This has been an amazing conversation. And thanks to everyone in the room. So many of y'all are incredible giants in your own right, moving this work. And I know many of you could have schooled us on this topic. So thank you. Can't wait to see y'all at Black Mothers March. Please register. Please lift up the work. Get your family and your friends to come to Black Mothers March. And yeah, appreciate y'all. Thank you.
see you guys.